Welcome to episode 44 of Leading People with me, Jerry Murray. This episode is brought to you by Wide Circle, helping you make better talent decisions. To learn more, visit widecircle.eu. That's WIDECIRCLE.eu. What level of impact and influence do you have at work? Indeed, what level of impact and influence do you have in your life in general? And are there situations where you wished you had more impact and influence? This week we have a slight change to the format in that I'm having a conversation with two talented ladies about their books and their work with leaders. Elisabet Hearn and Mandy Flint have worked together for over 20 years. They have a passion for helping leaders, and indeed all of us, develop our impact and influence in the workplace. So, without further ado, let's hear what they have to say. Elisabet and Mandy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi, Mandy. I'm looking forward to talking to you today.
Great. So a mutual friend introduced me to your work sometime at the end of last year, actually. And then I went and checked it out, checked some videos, and then I thought actually that your work on leadership would be worth featuring on the Leading People podcast. And also I thought this would be the first episode where I've had two guests on. And I thought this could be quite interesting as well to see how that works. So welcome again. So I know that you've written several books together. But before we talk about the books, how did you get here? Is there a person, place, or an event or something that stands out in your journey to where you are today? Or was there one of these epiphany moments? And how did you kind of end up, meet up and start working together professionally? So who wants to go first?
So I'm Mandy. I'll start, and Elisabet will of course add to and bring anything else in. But we met a long time ago, and it's over 20 years, so I'm going to say it stopped there. But we met at working together at American Express, where we had tremendous fun together, doing lots of interesting work around leadership and the dynamics of how do you turn the culture of an organization through leadership? How do you get a new culture? How do you work with the changing shifts in the world around? How do you then make that into the DNA of the business? So how do you turn it through the leadership right through to how do you make it work in the business? And then how do you drive those sort of soft skills into hard results? And we met working together there, left over 20 years ago, and then both started to work in the field of leadership outside of American Express with many different organizations and people, and had mega fun. I guess Elisabet and I, you kind of said, we do all this work, we've done it for a long time, I'd love to write a book, love to do that. And Elisabet said, yes, so would I. But you need an accountability buddy to do that sometimes. So once you've said it, the minute you've said it, you start working together, and then it just becomes a huge part of how much fun it is, and how you can just enjoy doing it as well as make it. You don't want to have to make it hard work. So we've enjoyed working together for a long time.
So Mandy, you're from the UK. Elisabet, you're not from the UK.
Mm-hmm. I'm from Sweden, but I moved to the UK in 95, and then I went back to Sweden for a while. But I mean, we have effectively, Mandy and I, we have worked together for, and as Mandy said, we're not going to say the exact numbers, but something over 20 years. And even after we set up our own businesses and left American Express, we continued to work in the sort of similar field, really looking at leadership as a culture driver and a culture shaper, so that leaders can really have a look at not just their technical skills of being effective at their job, so not just the what, but the how of getting their job done. So very much around what kind of ripple effect do you create around you every single day when you show up at work or on a Teams call or wherever you are. And that's really what's driven both of us, and really interested in seeing how that works. And with that, we have each of us worked with God knows how many organizations and countries all around the world. And at times we've also come back together and worked together, which is always good fun. But then, of course, we, as Mandy said, we started talking about a book and just thought, wouldn't it be fun if we could write a book and actually start putting something down on paper and reach more people about what it is we're doing. Mm-hmm. So we started off writing a novel. So we ended up writing a leadership novel, which is all about, and it's called The Team Formula, and it's all about a team that comes together after a merger in the insurance industry. And you get to follow this team over about a year's time, including reading the journal of the leader who's really struggling with this disparate group in various countries and having different agendas. And we had so much fun with this book, got it published, but then we were approached by a bigger publisher, so Pearson Financial Times Publishing, and they wanted us to write more of a sort of a normal book about how to lead teams and lead people. So we ended up doing that as well. So now we're on our third book for them. So we're currently on our fourth book in total that we're writing at the moment.
So was that first leadership book a thriller or a comedy or?
No, it was a lot to do with relationships, and of course, because we work lots with organisations who are merging and acquire, mergers and acquisitions. So when you go through that, and lots of people experience that, is what's it like for everybody in that transition? What's the change like? How do you lead through that change? What's it like for yourself personally, and how do you do that? So we went to there's a business dynamic around how organisations merge and what that's like, but also what's it like for the people in it, and what's it like for the leaders who've got to lead through that change while they're going through that themselves. So we wrote it. It makes me laugh when you say thriller, because we did have some moments where Elisabet and I would say, well, what would that person say? Or they'd say that. Oh, no, they'd say that, wouldn't they? And then we had some laughs which had to be edited out. But, there was some definite fun in the relationship side of that, writing that book, for sure.
And I reckon it could become a thriller over time, because we're sort of still planning a series of books of these novels in the business space. And I reckon it might turn into a thriller eventually, because relationships at work can be very interesting.
All the sequels. Yeah. And what was the feedback like? Because, we have had some famous books like Who Moved My Cheese, The 1 Minute Manager. Even Patrick Lencioni has written one. It was kind of a cool thing to do. How easy was it to write it from that perspective, and how well was it received by your audiences?
It was really well received by the audiences. Interestingly, it's the publishers who didn't necessarily like to go down the thriller route, or I love your words, as the thriller route, because they didn't necessarily like the fact that they like to have it much more, what's the how-to? How do you go away and practically apply it? And of course, reading a novel, it was really intriguing. There was lots of practical advice in it of how to do it, but it was an interesting angle. Of course, the people who loved it was the readers loved reading it, because it was so intriguing to read. Is that what the leader was really thinking when we thought they were really confidently leading through this? Were they really going home and we even thought, as a human being, you go home and have a chat with your partner. He was chatting with his partner about it and, saying, I've really struggled today. This new team are not gelling the way I thought they would. And we tried to bring them together, and it didn't, why didn't it work as well as I thought? And of course, that's a natural dynamic that's going to happen. So we wrote it from a slightly different angle, and people liked that because it brought the human aspect of, people don't always feel confident about how they are, and they're not always necessarily aware of their impact.
And it's also, I think what was really interesting to see, there was a number of people who contacted us when that book came out, and they said, you've been looking at us, haven't you? There was a real sense of recognition. And I think that's why it was so popular, because people were saying, I've seen all of this almost. I could recognize all of this. And I wish I had thought about it differently at the time and found a way to resolve the situation I was in. Mm-hmm. But this story that this whole book was about gave me a lot of nuggets about what I can do differently next time around.
And interesting that the publishers were not so much in tune with what what readers actually would like. Because, there's a lot of research out there in neuroscience and that shows that we remember stories and we can identify with characters. If somebody says, can you explain the 5 points of whatever? and they might struggle. But if you said, what did he actually do when he was confronted with that team? Oh, well, he did this and this and this, and then they reacted. So it's interesting. But that's not the book we came to talk about, I believe. Which book are we going to talk about?
Well, I think we could tell. Sorry, Elisabet.
You've got one here called The Leader's Guide to Impact, How to Use Soft Skills to Get Hard Results. Is that the one we're going to unpack a little bit today? Because there's another one coming out sometime in the future, right?
Yes. So that is our third book, the one you're talking about. It came out a couple of years ago. And we are writing our fourth book, which will be out in almost exactly a year. In about a year's time, the next book will be out. But that's not known with a title yet, so we'll come back to you on that one. But The Leader's Guide to Impact, we love this book. We love all our books, but it is so much around the kind of work that we do every day. It's that whole idea of what happens when you show up as a leader. Again, it's that ripple effect. What happens around you? How do you make other people feel? Do they connect with you in such a way that they want to work with you, they want to deliver results, or do you come in and you're in a foul mood and people get fearful? And when people get fearful, they don't speak up, they don't come with suggestions or innovative ideas. So it's really taking conscious control of that and saying, do I know what my impact is? Why do I leave it to chance when I can actually consciously start to think about what do I want to happen when I show up?
Okay. What was your purpose in writing this particular book? Because what was the second book called then? The first one was the team. What did you call the first one?
Team Formula.
Oh, Team Formula. Yes, I can't read my own writing. Team Formula. The second one was called what?
The second one was called Leading Teams: 10 Challenges, 10 Solutions. So that one was about, exactly as it says on the tin, what are the biggest challenges that you have, and how do you overcome them? What do you do? And the interesting dynamic there is that one was written in a format now they're all written in a format where we tell a story, and because we love telling stories, so we tell a story and then we unpick the story and say what happened in the story, and then we give you tools and techniques to say this is what you need to do. So that one, we managed to keep our storytelling technique in, although they wouldn't let us to write a whole novel, we managed to keep it in each chapter that we tell the story and then we unpick the story, which is the fun bit. And then we went on to The Leader's Guide to Impact after that one. And that book, it looks at, as Elisabet describes, it makes you, first part is about, what is impact? Why is it important? How do you achieve it? And we believe that, leadership is, everyone's a leader. Leadership is the act and art of influencing others. So and therefore that creates the culture at work. So therefore you can be a leader, you can be a formal leader, or you can be an informal leader, but wherever you're working, if you're having an influence, then you're impacting others, then you're a leader. So it's just taking that concept a stage further. And then we talk about, what's the impact on our different audiences? So we all need to be thinking about what's the impact we have on our employees, but importantly, what's the impact we have on the people around us, the peers that we work with at the same level? What's the impact we have on our bosses? What's the impact we have on the board if we want to go up to that level? What's the impact we have on external stakeholders? What's the impact we have on people who are more senior than us, people who are not, people who work aligned with us? So looking at all those different angles and thinking about it. And then the last part, we look at the impact to outcomes. So, for example, lots of people are going through masses of change in their organisation. So how do you create a change driving impact? How do you create a more collaborative impact? How do you become more innovative? How do you create that kind of impact? So we wanted to write from those different angles to get to meet people in different places, because we all have an impact every day, every minute, every second.
Okay, so I'm putting my feet in the shoes. Not my shoes in the feet, my feet in the shoes of the listeners, which I like to do. I'm going to ask you a few questions. How do you define impact?
I'll let Elisabet answer that one.
Yeah, impact is what you create around you. The impact is what people remember you for. The impact is what you make other people do as a response to you being there, to doing something. It is literally about what happens when you are there doing something. And it can even be you not being there and not doing anything, because that can equally be, there might be expectations that you should be doing something as a leader and you don't. Then that also is an impact.
Okay.
So it is the actions and the behaviours, or the lack of actions and behaviours, that create a response in others. That's what impact is. And of course, ultimately, and what this book is all about is, how do you ensure that you have a really positive, constructive, forward driving, inclusive kind of impact that means other people want to work with you, and you're able to do a good job and you're able to deliver for the organisation. Yeah, Mandy.
Okay.
And also, we have an impact whether we pay attention to it or not. So it's also a little bit about being intentional about it, but being authentic and being yourself, but being okay with that, but being a bit more intentional sometimes about your impact and the effect that you have, because you'll have one whether you're paying attention to it or not.
So this was the next question. You say it can be intentionally created. How?
So it's like a bit like you're training a muscle, your awareness muscle. You're aware. You're aware of some things. You're not necessarily so aware of others. So you become more aware of it. So what was the effect and impact I just had there? What's the rate? Can I have my radar out a little bit more on that? So as you just said, you put your shoes in yourself, not yourself, in the shoes of the listeners. It's a bit like that. What if I'm looking at the effect I'm having? What's the effect I'm having right now? Is my radar out enough to pick that up? Can I do that? Can I train that muscle? It's like, can I train my awareness muscle to say, what did I have that? What was going on there? Can I do something different now? Can I intentionally change that? And it's just about being self-aware of that. It doesn't mean you go around the whole time analysing or psychoanalyzing yourself. It's more about, that was the effect I had then. Was that what I wanted? And if I wanted that, brilliant, great result, keep doing it. But if I didn't, what do I want to do differently next time?
Have you been reading my questions? Because my next question is, how can leaders improve their self-awareness and understanding of others? So, or maybe that dovetails into what you were going to say anyway, Elisabet. So,
yeah, I mean, what I would say as well, to build on what Mandy was saying, is that one of our key recommendations to people, and again, everyone's a leader, as Mandy says, so it doesn't mean that you have to be in a leadership role. You can be an informal leader. There's a lot of informal leaders out there making a lot of waves and having an impact. It's actually a lot of people plan for meetings. I'm going to be on a Teams meeting later, for example, and what am I going to do there? What do I need to talk about? One of my key recommendations is to think, how am I going to be? How am I going to show up? What's my body language going to be like? How do I look very stern? Am I smiling? What does that do to other people in the room? So it's that whole idea of not just thinking about what to do, but how to be is absolutely crucial. And then from a self-awareness point of view, it's about starting to understand, what stresses me, what energizes me, because all of those things will affect how I will be. Mandy, you were thinking something there as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking, your impact, it is about the ripple effect that you create. So what starts from the inside. So whatever you're thinking and feeling, your thoughts create that, then you feel that, and then your behaviours drive it. Then you get the impact, then you get the results. So it's a kind of the ripple effect of going backwards and forwards with that. So thinking through some of that is being aware of, for example, if I love this, Elisabet and I talk about this a lot, but if you want to be, and actually we were in Belgium, it made me think as we were talking to you, we were in Belgium and we were running a leadership process that we've been through, Elisabet and I, many times before, and we were thinking, I really want to think about what state do we need to elicit in ourselves to get into others. And we wanted to be inspiring in that session. And we were thinking, okay, so to be inspiring, we need to be inspired. And we'd done this program quite a lot of times before. So we're thinking, okay, how do we get inspired to keep us going through this process and doing it again? And we got inspired by going through the process of remembering all the comments and observations we'd had previously about it changed my life. I think it's fantastic. It really made me think. It had a big impact on me. And so we started to think we need to elicit that in ourselves to be inspired, to be inspiring to others. So you need to go back and think that's what's happening from within. But we do have the ability to shift that and bring that the state that we want so that we can have that ripple effect in the world around us. I don't know if you'd add anything to that, Elisabet.
Yeah, the thing I would say is that it's about not leaving it to chance and let those outside circumstances dictate where you end up. So if you've had a week where you feel you're not inspired, you owe it to yourself and the people that you work with to recapture your inspiration or your energy or whatever that may be, because all you have in the moment when you're connecting with other people is that moment. It's the whole idea of being 100% present then and there, and not just focusing on what am I going to do, but really coming back to it and saying, it's almost like leadership is an inside job. It starts from the inside. It starts with really not just be affected by what's happening around, but choosing my own state of mind so that I can be the best me in that moment.
Okay. So what do you say to somebody out there who has a self-belief that winging it, they're brilliant at it? They're master improvisers, so why bother? I mean, look, I always know how to... this is the kind of belief system. Well, I don't want to have to prepare. That's very restrictive. I mean, I don't want to be like a robot. Okay, so they kind of go on. What do you mean by being intentional about it? I just rock up and people know me, and I'll go in there. What do you say to those people, if any of them might be listening? Coming up, Elisabet and Mandy explain the importance of using soft skills to achieve hard results. They emphasise focusing on how to do this rather than on what to do. Self-awareness around behaviours plays an important role, and as they both illustrate through several examples from their work, can have many benefits as well as unintended consequences. So, back to our conversation.
That's great. Well done. That works for you, right? It works for you. It's good. You can rely on yourself. And what you're doing with that is saying, we always talk about really pulling out your strengths, right? And using them and utilizing them when you need to. So that's a great example of people who do that. They trust themselves. They know themselves. They know that they can do that. And so they're pulling on their strengths. So you're doing that more subconsciously doing I know that I need to I know that I can do this well, so I'm okay with it. And that's the naturally using your strength to help you do that. So keep doing that. That's a great thing to do. It's when that doesn't, that you need to think differently about it. And Elisabet, you can pick up on that.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not, trying to be something you're not. So all of a sudden, you have to be really structured about this. It is about knowing yourself, as Mandy says, and using your strengths. But maybe then also thinking that, I am doing really well, but there is always more we can do. I don't think anyone is sort of a finished product. So it's a question of saying, maybe saying, right, are there times in this last week or the last month when somehow I didn't get to where I wanted to get? What was going on there? Who was I with? Is there something I can do in how I connect with this stakeholder for next time around? So we find, for example, that some people don't get on at work or they just do not gel in the way that they could. And sometimes then people go away from a meeting and they're quite frustrated because they felt they were somehow on edge with another person. And that tends to then taint to the next meeting because there's now a sort of a mindset about a specific person that we then take into the next meeting. So it's also thinking about those things and saying, who are the people I'm not quite gelling with? Is there something else that I can do to connect more with them and help them want to connect with me so that we can get better results going forward? Because nothing is ever 100% perfect. Thank goodness. I mean, that would be so boring.
So, I think it's Dan Gilbert who once said human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished, right?
Yes.
I quite like that one. What role does curiosity play in all of this?
Oh, it's massive. You have to be massively curious all the time. And because we don't know everything, even though sometimes leaders think they need to know everything, no one knows everything. And by being curious, the more curious we are, the more we learn, the more we understand, and the more we can also connect with other people because we get a wider, more diverse view on what's going on around us.
So how do we cultivate? How does somebody cultivate their curiosity?
Ask questions.
Asking questions is a great way of doing that, and I think you also got to allow yourself to that because I think what happens as we grow as leaders, sometimes we cut that back. We stop doing that because we don't, the more senior people become, the less they think they can ask those stupid questions. And actually, the key is to ask those questions and to not feel like, oh my God, I can't say that because that's going to sound stupid. Well, someone wants to ask it. Someone's probably thinking it. So be curious. And we talk a lot in the books about behaviours, more so the how you're going to do it as well as the what. And that's one of the crucial ones we talk about in the book is how do you be curious? How can you cultivate your curiosity? Ask questions, things move so fast. How can you utilize that? So we can find things out, don't mess with the Google generation. You can find things out instantly. So be more curious and spend more time stepping back and allowing yourself to be curious, because what happens is we get busy doing stuff. So we can be very busy. We've all got the busy bug. We can be busy doing the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And to be curious, sometimes you have to take a step back and you have to just press the pause button just for a moment to think, to enable me to be more curious, I might need to just step away from this to think about it. And, people can do that by lunchtime, taking a walk around, or, even if they're working from home or in the office, just take a walk. The minute people take a step back, they often find it's easier to go, oh, now I can be more curious. But that's one of the behaviours that we talk a lot about in terms of be curious about yourself, be curious about others, be curious about your peers, be more curious about your boss, be more curious about, how other people are doing things, as well as what they're doing, as Elisabet said.
Yeah, and I mean, I would put it that we're all culture shapers. Every single person, we sort of shape the culture we have around us, the atmosphere that we work in. But as leaders, particularly so, it's almost like you're on stage. You have the spotlight on you in some kind of way as a leader, and therefore, being a culture shaper, really thinking about how can I, by asking questions, for example, I encourage other people to ask questions. I encourage other people to recognize that they don't have all the answers either. And therefore, people become more open-minded in trying things out, daring to ask questions. And in order to drive innovation, that's what you need. So you can really shape a culture of curiosity, exploration, and innovation by being someone who asks questions and therefore inspires others to do as well.
Okay. So one thing that occurs to me when you're talking about this is this notion of, which isn't, I think, something that some leaders struggle with, this notion of being vulnerable and humble.
Yeah. Yep. Being vulnerable and humble is goes with the territory, is part of the job. But you've got to be, people find that more complex. I was with a team yesterday who, some people found that more complex with a group of peers to be vulnerable and humble, yet they felt more comfortable being vulnerable and humble with the team that works directly for them, because they were, what will happen if I am? So people go to the what if I do that, the what if scenarios. What if I do that? I might not get this, or I might do that. But I can. It's okay to be vulnerable and it's okay to be humble, but I've also got to be comfortable with who I am to enable me to do that. So I've got to feel fine with that. I've got to really know, and Elisabet and I talk a lot about, you've got to really know what your strengths are. And we have lots of strengths blind spots as humans and as leaders, because we are so good at some things that we don't know how good we are. We just don't recognize it. We don't acknowledge it. So we can jump into it's a natural strength, but if I don't know I'm doing it, how do I know it's natural? So how can I use it? How can I pull on it? How can I pull that out? So, knowing that, if I know that I'm good at that, then I can become more vulnerable and more humble.
Okay, well, taking your example and taking Elisabet's point about culture shapers, that team didn't feel very comfortable with their peers. What does that say about their leader?
Yeah, and that could be in that instance that their leader, that team are not feeling comfortable, because if something's said or if people show vulnerability, then it's not acknowledged, it's not recognised, and it's not appreciated. So then that means their behaviours, they'll stop doing it, and then they'll stop doing it. And as we said, everyone's a culture shaper. So if they stop doing it, they stop doing it as a team, they stop doing it with their peers, then the culture that can create can be one of, well, I'm not going to say what I need to say, so I'll maybe shut down in that, and I might not be as honest as I could be. So you're creating a culture where there might be some, it's not easy to say what you want in that environment. So you have to work at that then to change that culture and shift, and that starts with leaders showing and demonstrating more vulnerability and allowing people to make mistakes, allowing people to do things that they might, to be more innovative, they might need to make a mistake, but allowing them to do that.
So it sort of echoes. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. It's a good reminder that it takes time to build a really good team as well, because people will not instantaneously just trust each other and feel completely comfortable with one another and sort of let their guards down and say, you know what, I am comfortable with showing my vulnerability. That takes time. There needs to be that kind of psychological safety there to make people dare do that.
You're reading my mind. I was just about to ask about Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety. At the same time, what occurs to me is, you have this sort of collective, how's this? People say it's the management or the leadership, or in the EU they talk about the hierarchy, and yet they've nominalized something which is a group of human beings. And it always occurs to me that even when you go up and you look up and you say, well, it's all about them, and it's all about them, it actually ultimately ends up at one person's door, doesn't it? The CEO. And then when you think of the CEO, and it's a public company, the pressure from the board and everything else. So this is not a very linear, this is a very kind of systemic, dynamic kind of thing. So there isn't one place that you have to look for this. Is that right?
That's right. It is very complex. You have a lot of players. And I think that's sometimes why people say, oh, I can't make a difference anyway. It almost feels too big and you're thinking, where do I even start? But every single person has an opportunity to do it where they are to start with, and actually trust that goes a long way in itself. But it's also to continue to raise the awareness of, we don't just come to work to carry out technical tasks of the actual job itself. But raising the awareness of that working and interaction with other people is so much more than just the task and the goal. It is so much about the how. And the more we understand it's about the how, the more we can have an impact at several layers with this and actually have conversations about this and saying, this is largely what it's about. And, it almost comes back to that one of my favorite quotes, or one of our favorite quotes from Maya Angelou, that people will rarely remember what you said or what you did, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And it's that thing, that we're always making people feel something, because we are emotional beings, all of us. But sometimes we tend to think that should be left at the door when you come to work, and here we just do tasks. It just doesn't work that way. We're all dependent on one another. All business is very much human to human interaction, no matter how you look at it.
That's an interesting point. Yeah. I mean, I have a question here, and it might even be linked to that. From your experience, how do you align leadership impact? Because if one or two step out of line and don't walk sort of whatever the talk is that has been agreed, as whether we're going to be allowed, improve the psychological safety, or we're going to do this, how do you get an alignment around that leadership layer?
And I think people, one of our other favourite quotes we have is that transformational change happens at a behavioural level. It's our quote, I think. I don't know where that came from. I think maybe it's that quote. But anyway, transformational change happens at a behavioural level. So you can put in lots of actions, and you need to put in actions and demonstrate and say we will do this. But then the behaviours of people and holding each other to account to that will mean that's where the differentiator comes. So people will put in place, right, we'll all agree this, let's go away and agree that. But then the check-in points to agreeing that, and the accountability of how, if I say to my peer, we've all agreed that we are not going to say this, or we're going to do this, or and I just saw that you didn't. So we're going to be more vulnerable, and you didn't do that. I just saw you tell that person not to do that because it didn't work very well. Then that didn't demonstrate being vulnerable, didn't allow that to happen. Then you need to have the accountability and trust in the team to enable you to have that conversation and say, we agreed to this, didn't we? So the agreement of what are we heading for? What are we aiming for? is about the what we're going to do as a team, but it's also about how we are going to do that, how we're going to behave, how we're going to react. And that's just as important. And often teams miss that part out. So leadership teams and organisations miss that part. And I think a lot of what we're describing here, and we started talking about being curious, and there's also something about taking great courage to do some of this. So some of this takes courage, and some of the most courageous leadership teams and leaders and CEOs are the ones who will allow for this to happen and be okay with it, saying it didn't work or it did work, and what did we do? And we need to check in on how we're doing this, not just what we're doing.
And I think, and a key point to this, so a lot of the work that we do, we often do culture studies where we actually go out and interview people to see how does the organisation really function, what's going on, how are people behaving. And leadership teams then get to look at that because it becomes much more tangible. Otherwise, these concepts can sound very theoretical and say, yeah, well, you should behave this way, or we should do this way. But when you really hold up the mirror in the form of this is what people are experiencing and seeing, it becomes crystal clear the role that the behaviour and the interaction between leaders within a leadership team, for example, whether they are aligned or not, or whether they're creating confusion because they're actually misaligned, they can see what the effect of that is, and you get much further with that because you can then understand what culture is really like past just the sort of the strap lines.
And we have a great example of that where we had one of those studies we did. We had a leadership example where someone was saying, I'd like to share an example with the leadership around. I was asked to go to the board, or I was asked to go to a senior leadership team meeting, and I was asked to present. And of course, they turned up at the meeting and they were a little bit late, so they had to stand outside and wait, or wait online, the virtual version of that. And then they were asked to go in. They did. They started their first slide, and all of the leadership team jumped on the slide and said, I want to talk about this. What about this? What about this? And they said, well, actually, if you let me go through it, I could give you the answers to all these things. So they came out of that meeting, and they were jumped on many times, asked many questions, and came out of the meeting. And then I caught them afterwards. I was asking them a bit more about this example. And they said, well, that made me feel dreadful. So how did you feel? How did you feel? What was the impact on you? Well, I felt dreadful. I didn't really feel like I was listened to. I didn't really feel like all the work I'd put into that was valuable. And so what are you going to do next time? Well, I'm definitely not going to put as much effort into doing that. And do you know what? If they think they can do it, let them do it themselves. So the creation, so if you look at what was the impact? What was the effect? What did that make that person do? How did they behave? What did it do to we went right through to what does it do to profitability when people start to do that? That comes from that very simple example. But it's many people, when we tell that story, say, yep, I know I've done that, or I've heard that. And of course, that's the thing that grapevines through the organisation faster than anything about a senior team, quicker than you would like to have anything communicated.
So how do you measure a leadership impact?
Well, there's a number of ways you can do it, but it's clearly through some kind of surveys. You can do it that way, of course, but you can also look at it from a point of view of starting to measure the effect of saying, when we lead like this, what's the effect of anything from employee turnover to how much productivity we can get within the team. All of those kind of links can be made throughout, but it's a question of first connecting up and seeing what leads to what.
Yeah,
so
and actually that's more or less my next question is, can you give some examples to our listeners? Because you talk about the title of the book it mentions this notion of hard results, soft skills to get hard results. Can you give our audience maybe some examples of where hard results have actually been obtained as a result of some of your programs?
So there's so many. Where do you start? But from a link, what we always do in terms of, is make those links. So, for example, when those things happen, we had an organisation who had. I'm going to give you this example as one. So they came along. There was an issue with the numbers. I'm going to give an example of numbers, but say the numbers were out by 1 million. They were down by 1 million. in month one. So
percentage might be more useful, because a million on a billion is nothing. So maybe let's do something like, was it like 5% or 10% out or something?
10%.
Yeah, okay.
And no one was going to tell the leader, because they're like, well, I'm not going to tell him. And it happened to be a male, but it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to tell him a you. No, I'm not going to tell him a you. No. Okay, next month, guess what happens? It's gone up 25%. Okay, right, yeah, I'm definitely not going to tell him. Are you going to tell him? No, I'm not going to tell him. So what happened after that, you know the story, you can tell what's going to happen, is that the impact was dramatic, and then no one wanted to. Then they did, of course, and then all hell let loose, and the organisation went into a serious decline. There was major issues with it. But that came down to, when we reviewed that and analysed that, it came down to the behaviour of that individual. It was nothing to do with we went in, the accountants went and and the finance guys did the analysis on it, but the analysis was telling them the same thing. It was 10, it was 20, it was 25%. But actually what happened in the end was, it was because that person was going to react badly when someone was going to tell them.
Yeah.
So if you're going to create a culture, what do? You create a culture where you're more open, it's more transparent, people can be comfortable, people can say what they want to say without fear of that happening, and then you're going to create something different, and you're going to get a different result. So there are many examples like that where it's the behavioural side that's driving it, not necessarily.
And I think one of the key numbers that keep coming up time and time again is employee turnover or non-turnover. So there are a number of examples where we're coming to organisations where there's been a high turnover because there is not an awareness of why people aren't enjoying working there anymore. Sometimes it's found through exit interviews, and sometimes it's not. But when you start looking at it and you really start focusing on how you build really strong teams, how you connect well with stakeholders, how you get people to want to work together, then you are turning off the tap of turnover, and you're actually getting people to stay, but also be more engaged. So we then see the levels of wanting to learn more, wanting to progress, wanting to be more, actually comes in as well. And then, of course, you see employee engagement coming up, and that tends to have an effect on customer loyalty. So there's a number of different measurements that you can start to see the effect of, and of course, ultimately on profitability.
Yeah, and I think the other emerging thing apart from turnover is the burnout rates in organizations is very topical at the moment. It seems to be, whether that's just because it's being more acknowledged or whatever, it's that can be a metric that is conditioned by pressure coming down all the time and expectations and that. But I've coming to the end. I'm imagining some of our listeners might be thinking, well, so what are some of the things that I could do? You talked about you can be a leader without getting a designatory authority, title. You can be a leader because you step up to do, to what did you just find it earlier on about? You're basically going to make something happen, shape something. Okay, so what are some things our listeners could start doing immediately after listening to this podcast to improve their own impact? Now, a word from one of our sponsors.
How much impact and influence do your leaders really have? Could increased self-awareness make them more effective at building relationships, achieving results, and providing direction? At Wide Circle, we have the tools to provide these valuable insights so you can ensure that your leadership development programs are targeting the right areas. And we train you to use these tools so you don't need us to do it all for you. To learn more, go to widecircle.eu/leadership influence, all one word.
So they could start by, a really simple thing we talk about is having creating an impact strategy yourself. So thinking about your own impact and deciding on what outcome you want to have. The simple 5-step strategy we talk about, an impact strategy, which is, decide on what impact you want to have in a particular situation or with a particular set of people. What will it lead to? What will you need to do? How are you going to know what's the target date for you to do it by? You might want to do something next week. You might want to do it in a meeting tomorrow. You might want to do it in a bigger piece, and then create something intentional about what you're going to do and how you're going to behave differently, and think about preparing not just about what you want to do, but how do you want to be. And we also have a really simple thing that's called creating an impact. We call it an impact meter, an impactometer, if you like. So think about, if you imagine that you maybe in a meeting, you're going to a meeting with the peers, and you have on the impact meter, you've got, out of 100, you're at 50. You want to move it to 75 to have more influence over a decision or something like that. Then you may consider you might need to listen a bit more intently next time to get your peers to engage with that, or to move yourself up on the impactometer. So it's thinking about things like that, simple things that will just be quick and easy to do, that you can do quite quickly. Elisabet, those are the two that came to the top of mind.
No, but I think it's the intentional piece again, really thinking about, who am I going to be talking to this week? Who am I working with? Who do I really need to listen to me? Who do I need to listen to? And then with intention go into those interactions. And also think about, how am I thinking about this person or these people? Do I still have some residual annoyance from a previous meeting? If so, I have to get rid of that, because otherwise I'm on a downward spiral in impact with this particular person, which is why we've shared this week actually on LinkedIn one of our favorite little hacks, if you like, when it comes to impact. It's about peers, because we feel when people work with people on their same level, there's sometimes like a natural competition there, but actually the peers are some of the most important people we have around us. So if we can just each week, each day, go into the thinking that actually, what if I thought of my peers as my customers? How would I treat my customers? And can I do the same thing with my peers? Because there tends to be a lot that we can achieve there by just working more effectively with people on our same level as well. There's often a mismatch there.
Yeah, I mean, and in the wake of the Football World Cup that has taken place, I mean, imagine we've seen football teams full of star players who can't score or can't win any games because they don't play together. They actually play against each other. The person who gives the assist can often be a better hero than the guy who poked it into the net, because of if the assist is very well done, it can be. So it's kind of getting, I suppose, people to think in those fresh ways about these things.
Yeah, be curious and be courageous and be vulnerable, and think about the being, not just the doing. That's if you can do that, then that in itself changes things.
Right. Now, I believe, I normally ask people how we can get in contact with you after this podcast, if people want to reach out to you. And I believe if people do reach out to you, you have a special offer for our listeners. So maybe you can explain what that is and how they're going to be able to get it.
We sure do. So we'd love for you to contact us on LinkedIn. And the first 3 people to reach out to both of us, we're going to send you a signed copy of the latest book, The Leader's Guide to Impact.
So you have to reach out to both of you, because you're going to sit down and say, did we get a message from both people?
We can see in what order they came in.
Very, very good. Well, Elisabet and Mandy, thanks for sharing your insights, tips and wisdom with myself and our listeners today.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Great fun.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. You will find details of what we covered in the show with links, etc. in the show notes. Please share your key takeaways from today's guest and let your friends and colleagues know about the podcast. Oh, and if there's a particular author or leading thinker you'd like me to interview, just get in touch and I'll do my best to get them on the show. This episode was brought to you by Wide Circle, helping you make better talent decisions. To learn more, visit widecircle.eu. That's WIDECIRCLE.eu. Until next time.